The Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was a change from making things from hand to machine. Many inventions were created during this time period, including the steel mill, steam engine, and cotton gin. Most machines that were made needed to be near a water source because they relied on water power. The Northeast was the first region to experience most industrialization. Factories and cities made the population increase rapidly because many people were jobless and needed the money to survive. Unfortunately, the sanitary conditions in factories were very poor. It was dirty, very dangerous, and there were kids as young as 6 working. This made the people angry, causing labor unions to form. They wanted more breaks and higher pay in factories. Robber barons were wealthy people, mostly factory owners, that were unfair to their workers and gave them low pay. After a while, laws were made that said the workers can't work more than 10 hours a day. Soon after, more laws were passed against children working. Civil War and Reconstruction. The Battle of Gettysburg is known as the turning point of the war because it was the first battle that the Union won. The Confederate left the battlefield to retreat from the war, but the Union killed most of the Confederate soldiers. The North was more industrialized than the South and depended on their factories, causing them not to have a use for slaves. Eventually, they started to realize that forced labor wasn't right and wanted it to end in the United States. The South was mostly urbanized, which caused the South to hold more slaves. This was an important win because if they lost, the Confederates would have charged all the way to Washington, D.C. and made the Union government surrender. After the war, the South restabilized itself, and the whole process was known as Reconstruction. Social reformers and reform movement. The African slave trade started when Europeans settled in the New World. The North and South had both evolved different ways of life that led to differing needs for their slave labor. The North were mostly abolitionists because they did not want slavery. William Lloyd Garrison helped the North by publishing an anti-slavery newspaper called The Liberator. Frederick Douglass helped the North because he was an escaped slave who did not want anyone to suffer the way he did, so he traveled north and gave anti-slave lectures. What also helped the North was the Underground Railroad because they were getting more slaves into Canada, so they could be free. If the slave got away to Canada, they did not have to go back to their owners because they were free citizens. Stanton and Anthony formed the National Women's Suffrage Movement Association to work for suffrage on the federal level and to press for more extensive institutional charges, such as granting of property rights to married women. Stone created the American Suffrage Association, which aimed to secure the ballot through state legislation. In 1890, the two groups united under the name National Women's Suffrage Association. In the same year, Wyoming entered the Union, becoming the first state with general women's suffrage, which had adopted as territory in 1869. Westward expansion. Westward expansion started when people moved out west in hopes for a better life. It started in 1803 when the Louisiana Purchase was added to the United States. Soon after, Lewis and Clark started their expedition in 1804 to try to find an all-water route to the Pacific Ocean. After ending their expedition in 1806, Florida joined the United States during 1819. In 1845, the Texas annexation joined, along with Oregon Country in 1846. A few years later, in 1848, the Mexican Concession joined, and 5 years later, the Gadsden Purchase became a part in 1853. In 1848, gold was found on Sutter's Mill, and no matter how hard they tried to keep this a secret, people found out, causing the California Gold Rush in 1849. Soon, more people started moving out west in hopes for striking rich. To help people get west faster, the Transcontinental Railroad was created in 1863. 6 years later, in 1869, construction ended and people could then get out west faster. Early United States. The northern soil and climate favored smaller farmsteads rather than large plantations. Industry flourished, fueled by more abundant natural resources than in the South, and many large cities were established. By 1860, 1/4 of all Northerners lived in urban areas. Between 1800 and 1860, the percentage of laborers working in agricultural pursuits dropped drastically from 70% to only 40%. Slavery had died out, replaced in cities and factories by immigrant labor from Europe. The fertile soil and warm climate of the South made it ideal for large-scale farms and crops like tobacco and cotton. Because agriculture was so profitable, few Southerners saw a need for industrial development. Although the Continental Congress took the lead in issuing currency and bills of credit to fund the war, many states preferred to borrow money on their own credit. Beginning in 1776, Massachusetts was the first state to issue loan certificates. Prominently, loan certificates for funds borrowed the states to arm provision their quota of troops raised for the Continental Army. The collection also includes Army certificates used to pay the troops, certificates of interest payments due on loans, certificates issued to pay the state's adjusted amount of pay owed to the Army, lottery certificates, and certificates of interest on the liquidated debt owned by individual states. To help pay off this debt, officials created the tariff. A tariff is taxes that citizens had to pay. Tax collectors came and took their money to try and get rid of all the debt there was.